and Jerry people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional owners of the land in which we are all gathered today. We pay our respects to the local people for allowing us to have our gathering on their land, and to their elders, past, present, and future. Thanks to the organizer, thanks to Save the Children, my partner, and to Deakin University, another partner, for asking me to come here and present today, to have a chance to share with you what we are doing at the IKEA Foundation. I thought I would do three things today. I would try to share with you how we actually look at humanitarian leadership in the foundation and in the company. I want to talk a little bit about what I consider the biggest threats to the world at the moment, and then talk about the IKEA leadership and some of the things that you might not know about IKEA. So I was born in Norway. I was lucky. I was born in the right place. I can almost say the right time. I worked all my life in business, and most of the work I did in business was to benefit the kind of people who are just as privileged as me. So right now, I'm in a different position, and today I work with people who are much less privileged, and people who were not as lucky as me, being born in the right place. And here's one of them. This is Emanuela, and I got to know Emanuela must be 8 years ago. She's 4 years old. She's a beautiful little girl. She looks like she could be the new toddler model for Ralph Lauren for the spring collection, doesn't she? And she's smiling because she doesn't really understand the limited opportunities that she will have in life. Because of where she grew up, the opportunities are extremely limited. Her background is interesting. Her mother came from Rwanda. She just about escaped genocide in 1994. And her dad comes from Burundi. And he escaped forced military recruitment in 1995. And the two of them met in Kenya in 1996 in a refugee camp in northern Kenya called Kakuma. And they met each other, they married, and they actually had Emanuela and 2 other children. And guess what? 15 years later, they still live in a mud hut in a refugee camp in Kakuma, with very limited access to education, limited access to work, because work is normally not something that you're entitled to as a refugee. You're supposed to be there until you can go home, but these people can't go home. Now, the opportunities for Emanuela is clearly limited, but at IKEA we did what we could, at least, to make her famous, because we put her in the catalog, and the catalog is spread to more than 100 million eggs around the world. So if this is not a flying start, I don't know what a flying start is. There are 25 million refugees in the world today, and some of them get resettled to other countries. Clearly not to this country at the moment, but that's a different story. About 100,000 refugees out of 25 million get the opportunity to get resettled every year. And after 20 years, his family had the opportunity to get resettled to Minneapolis, Minnesota. And look at that family today compared to the family you saw outside of Mud Hut. It does make a big difference in their lives. And I will never forget this story because it makes me remember how lucky I am. I think great leadership, and I want to start to talk about leadership. I think great leadership recognizes leadership everywhere and isn't afraid to fail. For me, that's the key thing. You're a leader, you respect everyone, you hear everyone, you see what everyone brings to the party, and you're not afraid to fail because you want to drive innovation, you want to drive development. So this is Ingvar Kamprad. Ingvar Kamprad is the founder of IKEA. He founded IKEA during the Second World War in the middle of nowhere in the south of Sweden. In a small place where people were used to living off of very little. They were very frugal, but they were very fair about how they thought about them, their families, their surroundings, and the people they lived around. So Ingvar started this little business in 43. And his vision was to create an better everyday life for the many people. So his vision was not to create some luxury good that has a high price that will be available to the few. He wanted to have furniture, good quality furniture that was available to the many. And that was always his vision, his way of thinking about his business. And this was not some big strategy that some consulting firm helped him develop. This was just an idea that he worked on and worked on and worked on in an iterative way in order to get to where IKEA is today. $40 billion enterprise. That's owned by my foundation. Ingvar is always somebody who thought about this in a simple way. He likes simplicity. He doesn't want things to be too complicated. And several years ago, when the management came to him at a management meeting, a board meeting, and said, okay, we have something new here. We're starting to look at ROI. Starting to look at return on investment. So we looked at our previous investments, our future investments in an ROI concept. And Ingvar listened, and then in the break, he was walking up to one of the managers and said, who hired this guy Roy to come to the company? And it wasn't because Ingvar didn't understand the concept of ROI, it's because he wanted to remind people in a subtle way that this company was not has not been successful because of these big concepts. It's been successful because we looked at what we do and we looked at how we can do it better every day, which is not very different to what we do at the foundation. So IKEA is a company that is based on a very strong set of values. And it's not something they put on the wall. The values are fundamental for how they operate and what they do as a company and how they hire people and how they develop the company and how they think about the community in which they operate. So Ingvar, at the very early stage, many years ago, put all those values and all that thinking into what he calls the testament of a furniture dealer. And the testament of a furniture dealer is now sort of the guidebook for every 200,000 employees in IKEA worldwide, and partly also for the 2 million people who work in the supply chain, which are not IKEA employees, but still very important to the success of IKEA. And IKEA was lucky to be led by a great leader, an entrepreneur who thought about the value of each individual's contribution. Ingvar had one thing that he really loved to do. He would go to the stores. And he would start at 4 o'clock in the morning and go and talk to the people who actually put all the products into the store, make sure the store is full of products when it opens at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning. So there's a lot of work happening in the hours during the night. And Ingvar would go there at 4 o'clock, speak to them, and then he would work through the whole store, do all the departments. And at 6 o'clock at night, he will then bring the management together. He will tell them exactly what they did right and what they did wrong. And he loved to do this. And this was a way for him to actually demonstrate to people that details matters. And there's a way that we can be successful, and the way we can share best practices, and the way we can constantly improve on what we do as a company. So Ingvar was the chairman of the board of the foundation for many years. Sadly, he died a year ago, about 30 years after he started to prepare for his death, as he says, which was the function of actually giving the company to the foundation and making sure he could control it after his death, as he said, make sure that money is spent in the right way. He was a very people person. He would come to the office, and he will come to the foundation office early in the morning before everyone else was there. He will wait outside the door, and then when people came, he would hug them, and then he would say, you have to work harder, you have to come in earlier. And I remember there was one time we had a meeting with one of the partners, can't remember exactly which partner it was, and there were some people from the partner organization and some of my colleagues in that room. And Ingvar would just go walk into the room, and he would then walk around and introduce himself, and he would hug all the employees again, and he would leave the room. So Ingvar actually knew, after having met them once, that he knew who they were, and he made sure to make them feel that he knew who they were. And of course the partner said, who was that guy? And they explained, and then that says it all. So I think that's what's it's considered great leadership, when you can actually lead by example, and you can make everyone feel like they're important, and everyone feel like they matter in the organization. And you take the time to listen to people, encourage people, and bring the best out of them. So my life, it does work, right? Okay, so this is Ingvar then using the testament and talking to his 3 sons, who are now basically the custodians of IKEA. IKEA is not a family company because it's owned by the foundation, but at the same time, the 3 sons, it's the next generation. They represent the thinking and the concept and the values as members of the different boards of the company. And so I was lucky to be asked to come and run this foundation. And most of my life I spent in business. So I had a very steep learning curve, obviously. I didn't know anything about humanitarian work or development work or philanthropy. And that means that this foundation, which has now existed for 10 years, we're going to celebrate our 10th anniversary next week, actually, in Holland, has gone through quite an interesting development process. I mean, the way for me to be successful was to hire people who are smarter than me, who know something about running a foundation, who run something about philanthropy and about what's right to do in the humanitarian leadership and development leadership. And I tried to learn very quickly to be useful in that. So I had a chance to work with very good people, and I had the chance to work with very good partners, and that's how I learn and develop, and that's how the foundation developed. Now, one thing that's very important to me is that as a foundation, we have the chance to take risks. We can do risky stuff. And innovation is driven by taking risk and failing sometimes. So I thought I'd tell you a story about how we took a big risk once. This is a typical refugee camp. People live in tents. It's okay to go camping, right? And live in tents for a week like this. But if you have to live in tents for years, it's not a great life, it's not a dignified life. So early on, we started out talking to a foundation that says, we think we have an idea for how we can change the lives of people living in displacement by providing them a better shelter that provides more dignity for them. At the same time, it's cheaper for the organization. Because these things don't last very long in these environments. Very rough environments, usually windy, sandy, tough climate situations. So they break apart in 6 to 12 months. So we set out to do a project. We invested in this based on some good ideas, and we developed something that's not called a refugee housing unit, which is pretty much like this. It's polypropylene walls and roofs on a steel-based frame. And it provides a housing unit for people where they can stand upright, where you can't see through the walls at night, so more dignity. You can close the door, which is really important. Do you know how many refugees actually die in tent fires because they can't get out in time? Because they're so afraid of violence that they tie up everything around the tent, and it's not time to open that up before the tent burns down in 30 seconds. So this is different. And of course, this is delivered flat packed. And the moment we talked about flat packing, everyone thought this is an IKEA product. But it's not an IKEA product. So this is what it looks like. This is, I think it's from one of the Greek islands, and you probably read about the refugee situations on the Greek islands. And this is how people actually utilize these shelters to have a better life in a situation where they actually don't have a very good life in the first place. So I have a very unique opportunity. I have an opportunity to lead a group of people who are passionate about eradicating poverty, people who are passionate about eradicating the threats that climate change exists, and passionate about helping refugees and people in displacement to a better life. And I feel quite privileged to do that. It's a luxury to lead a team like that. And for me, humanitarian leadership is really driven by 3 important things. First of all, You want to be very close to the people you're trying to help. You want to listen very carefully to the people you're trying to help. You want to understand the root causes of their situation, because it's only then we can be very efficient about what we do to help them. Secondly, you want to work with the best partners, and the best partners aren't necessarily the largest partner. I mean, Save the Children is a great partner for me, so don't misunderstand me. But there are also very entrepreneurial organizations who might come up with another idea that can make us more effective. And remind you, one of the key values of IKEA is to be simplistic and be cost efficient, and look for how can we get better social return on investment. And we have tried to replicate all those simple values from IKEA and the foundation, because I think if we spend millions of dollars every year, $200 million actually, 200 million euros every year of IKEA profits, we should try to do that in the same way and with the same perspective as IKEA does when they make the money. We are luxury, we only have to spend it. So for me that's important. The third element that's really important to me is dare to take risk and drive innovation, because humanitarian support, humanitarian world needs more innovation, more new thinking, needs people to think outside of the box so that we can help more people for less money. We won't be able to help more people for less money unless we think about different ways of doing it. And that requires risk, and at least from a foundation point of view, I can take risks, I can fail. I can fail and it's okay. And I'm not in a business in the sense that I have to deliver short-term results in the next quarter. I can take a very long-term perspective. One of the reasons IKEA think Ingvar gave the foundation, the company to the foundation, is really that he felt that one of the key drivers of the success of IKEA is that we can take a long-term perspective. There are markets where IKEA entered that it took them 10 years to make profit. That's very difficult unless you have a long-term perspective in what you do. When Ingvar went into Russia, he said, well, Russians need us. Russian people need IKEA. Very simple way of looking at it. So I'm going to build a store in any city in Russia that has more than 1 million people. And he actually did. That leads me really to the second part that I want to talk about, which is the biggest threats we're facing in the world, climate change. I mean, you feel it, all of you, every day, probably, even here in Australia. But you know, climate change affects the poor the most. And we had a pretty good deal coming out of Paris in 15, the COP in Paris, but it's nearly not enough to keep us at 1.5 degrees of global warming. And anything beyond 1.5 degrees, 1.6 degrees is terrible compared to 1.5 degrees. And when you think about it, we have the 100-year flood every year now. We have the 100-year type hurricane every year now. Go to the news every week, almost every day. There's a flooding, there's an earth slide, there's a drought catastrophe. I mean, we're in, I shouldn't use that word, so I'll use another word. We're in trouble. We're in trouble, and we have very little time left. So for us, this is an important thing to focus on. Second thing that we think is one of the biggest threats is the lack of jobs. Lots of young people have no access to jobs. Unemployment rates are not high in this country, I know, but I guess in this country most of the growth is driven by immigration, but we put that aside for now. And think about what's actually happening in continents like Sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa has an enormous population growth right now. You will see a doubling of the population of Sub-Saharan Africa in the next 30 years. That might not impact you guys here so much, but it will impact everyone in Europe. And it will certainly impact the people who are born and raised in Sub-Saharan Africa. And unemployment is already very high in some of these countries. And the population growth is something we can't fix. We can't stop it. There's nothing we can do about it. So all we can do is try to help these people have a chance to establish a life for themselves, make a living, and be able to stay in the rural areas where they are born and raised, if they're born and raised in the rural areas, because that's what most people would like to. But if you are forced to leave because of climate change, or you're forced to leave because there's no economic opportunities, and you go to the cities, and you find out there aren't any jobs in the cities either, so then you go to the next country to see if you can find jobs, and there are no jobs there either. And then at some point, if you're lucky, if you don't die on the way, you end up on the beaches in Libya, and you try to get on a boat to Europe. And if you're lucky, you get to Europe, but a lot of them are not lucky and they drown. You know, we don't think that's the right approach, and I don't think that's right. And we know that there's no way we can stop the population growth, so we have to go to the root causes and say, what can we do to actually create opportunities for those people? And as I said, most of them will be born and raised in sub-Saharan Africa. The population in the rest of the world will more or less stabilize, or of course retract, as it does here, as it does in all the European countries. The fertility rate is way beyond replacement rate in all European countries. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we do as a foundation about this, how we try to address both of these two threats. And I said a little bit about the foundation earlier. We started out as a foundation that did donations to important programs that will make life better for children and youth, to actually becoming a foundation that takes a much more strategic grant-making approach to look at how can we be more focused and how can we address the big issues in the world and how can we be more impactful with the 200 million that we get to spend every year. So as we went through a strategy process to look at what is it that we can do, we ended up focusing like what you can see in this slide. It's really still about helping children and youth to a better life, but it's doing that in a very specific way. It's focusing on one hand on the climate side, on the other hand on the livelihood development side. So we have 4 portfolios, and we do this through 4 portfolios, and I'm going to talk you briefly through those four portfolios to see how we think we're going to make an impact. We want to be known for, first and foremost, the climate action side. We want to be known for helping create a livable planet for the many. There's no point in creating jobs for people if in the end the climate is unlivable for the next generations. So having to focus on climate change in a way to create a better life for children in the future, we think is very important. And we talk about radical collaboration. We talk about how we can do this in a way that makes everyone focus on this in a different way. So the climate action portfolio is really about driving action on a global basis, and both on a global and a national basis. I'll give you an example of what we did. We started out in 2 years before the COP in Paris. This is a little busy, but I'll try to explain it very quickly. The first phase, the 2 years, we said, okay, for the first time, why don't we bring the 7 leading climate NGOs together, have them and draft the strategy together, and be more efficient in how we work towards getting a better deal out of Paris than otherwise would have been the case. We think the commitment that came out of Paris was quite encouraging, but we still have a long way to go, as you know. So we decided we're going to continue to work with these guys to see what we can do to drive, especially business, to change how they think about things. So one of the initiatives that came out of this in the next round was RE100, which means Renewable Energy 100. That means 179 companies until now, global companies, have committed to become energy neutral by a certain time frame. IKEA said 2020, so IKEA will, by next year, produce more renewable energy worldwide than they consume in all their operations. EV is electric vehicle, the same principle. Then this third phase is really about what we call science-based targets. It's helping companies understand what does it take to reduce your carbon footprint, and how can you do that in a scientific way, and how can you go out and talk about it, so that we can use business as a driver to reduce the carbon footprint and the CO2 emissions. And hopefully, at a certain point, we will know, we reach this tipping point where it's going to be impossible to be in business without having that focus. That's when we will be successful. It's just an example of what we funded early on to get started. It was a risky adventure because it hadn't been done before, but we thought we had so little time left, so we paid for the entire campaign in the first 2 years after Paris to make sure that people can focus on doing the work instead of focus on doing the fundraising. A lot of you will be familiar with that part. So the second part is about renewable energy. It's trying to help powering communities with renewable energy is simply about thinking about the fact that access to energy gives you not opportunities to live a better life, but it gives you opportunities to create businesses and livelihood in a way that it's otherwise not possible. Now today, renewable energy through solar is cheaper than providing energy through coal, which is probably bad news for people, some people here, but it's very good news for the climate. And renewable energy in a microgrid concept is very doable in rural areas where you have no access to the grid. So what we try to do is help organizations establish an infrastructure and an ecosystem that enables people to access energy in a communal area. So that has an impact on the livelihood side as well as it has an impact on the climate side. So we're very committed to do that. Example of what we do is, this could be anywhere in the world, but this is actually in Jordan. And a few years ago we decided that for people to live in a metal container in the middle of the desert, which is what 50,000 refugees do in one of the camps in Jordan, it's pretty bad in the scorching heat in the summer. So with no access to electricity, you can have no fan, you can have no fridge to store your food. You live a very difficult life already, and it makes it even worse. So we said, okay, we will build a solar power plant. And we built a solar power plant that currently provides energy to 50,000 people. It's about 5 megawatts, so the energy need per family is not as big as what we have here, of course. But you know, it saves UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees, several millions of dollars in energy cost every year, and it saves the climate thousands of tons of carbon. And it's just something that's never been done before. Refugee camps have no energy by definition. There's no money for energy for refugee camps. The third part is what we want to be, is employment and entrepreneurship. We believe that in order, if people can make a living, if people can make a salary, if they can, 10? Okay. If people can make a living, make a salary, they can use that, they will use that salary to improve their children's health and education. We know that from research. And it's more sustainable if you allow people to make their own decisions, and they can do it on a sustainable basis because they have an ability to use their skills and their knowledge to turn that into money for themselves. And one example of what we do is in India, a few years ago, we committed to making 1 million women in rural areas employable. And doing that by talking to them about what their ambitions were, and then try to match those ambitions against job opportunities either in business or job opportunities through entrepreneurship. Providing necessary skills, working in a public-private partnership with different companies that will provide job opportunities, and mix this so that we mix the skills needed from the company side to the skills that are available for the women who have the ambitions and opportunity to go and work. For us, this is a way of creating employment opportunities which haven't necessarily been done in the same way before. We piloted this in 4 states in India. We're close to the 1 million now, and we hope we can scale this up with other states in India. India still needs a lot of work. They put about 12 million people into the workforce every year, and then certainly not creating that many jobs, even if Modi says that in his election campaigns these days. Last part is our agriculture portfolio, and as you can see, we try to help people in rural communities grow their incomes through planet-friendly agriculture. So it's not only about creating a better income from agriculture, meaning that you go beyond the subsistence level and you can make money so you can invest in your children's health and education. But it's about also preventing people from destroying this topsoil. That's also important to absorb CO2, as you know. Using more climate-friendly approaches, understanding the crop rotation, using the right fertilizers. And part of this program, which we run with One Acre Fund in Rwanda and Kenya, is also about tree planting and about crop insurance. Because if you do have, because of climate change, no crops, you really want to have insurance so it doesn't mean a ruin for your family. Emergency response. Across these 4 portfolios, we have a couple more things that we do. Emergency response is an important part of it. And in emergency response, we have a specific focus. We try to support unseen, and what we call unseen and silent emergencies. with efficient emergency relief. As you know, the emergencies that are getting big headlines usually get big funding. But there are lots of stuff happening around the world, terrible emergencies that never get funding. So what we do is we work with a few partners on an ongoing basis. We provide funding immediately to emergencies. They decide where the biggest needs are, and they basically go there. So an example of that would be the Ebola crisis in West Africa, where we funded Doctors Without Borders long before anyone thought this was a big issue. But Doctors Without Borders were the ones who were most effective in those countries at that point in time. And they needed the funding to actually do the work, and every day was important, as you know. Now they were successful in this situation. Now we have a similar problem in DRC, and fixed that yet. But obviously, this is the kind of emergency that requires immediate action. So we provide unrestricted emergency relief. So we partner. And in this context, we also partner, of course, with Save the Children and with IKEA University on establishing the Humanitarian Leadership Academy, because we believe very strongly in building a local capacity. I mean, why would you parachute in people from around the world if you can train the people locally who understand the language, who are close to the disaster when it happens, and can act immediately? It makes no sense. It makes sense to do the kind of work that we do together, and we're very proud of that relationship. What we also do across the different portfolios is our focus on refugee livelihoods, and we try to basically take approach to refugees which is about focus on self-reliance and focusing on harmony between refugees and host community in a protracted situation. The problem is, of course, that classically governments would just put them in the camp and say, you stay here until you can go home. And we know that the average refugee stays in the camp for 20 years. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty big waste of their resources, their skills and their talents, and it's terribly unsatisfactory to do nothing. Have no purpose in life. So our focus has been on trying to change that and working very closely with UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees, to think differently about how we work with refugees. So I'm going to show you an example from the south of Ethiopia. It's called Doloado. It has 200,000 Somali refugees, 200,000 host community people. The big difference in what we did compared to what's normally done is we actually we focused on development work in a humanitarian situation. We focused on helping these people to help themselves, building livelihood opportunities, and creating a harmony between the host community and the refugees by focusing as much on the host community as we did on the refugees. I mean, this is a very remote area. It takes 2.5 hours to fly from Addis Ababa to get down there. And you land in the desert on an airstrip where only the pilot knows that this is an airstrip. So I thought, instead of me talking, I will hopefully make this work. Okay. Fantastic.
laba sano fuula kanaalka meesha waxaa laga soo kacaya motoorka kanaalkan dheer bay qaadayeen marka nin walba iridaa u fuul oo nin walba beertiisa isku cadaya markii ay iridaan oo kanaalka ay ka degaan nin walba beertiisa haddana sidoo kale jid oo maraya jiro waa walaalo walba shabax lagu ixtiraamsanayo beertan waxaan ugu ogolaanay haddaba hay'adaha wax siinaya soo ma inay ka kaaftoomaan beertu waxay ka soo saartaan ay awood ku yeeshaan dad kale ay caawiyaan
قديم أنا ما ريت شاء ذا noloshay qudaarta sagalay ilmaha kabiilay kastii roodii adisiday kaarka qaali kala kaalmaysaday way nolol wal kastoo leen hadda jir qarugmaya ebi ila ahaje ho ilaahay igu ebi ila ahaje ni oo joogay
sideedoo mashruucyada dhan hay'adaha ay fuliyaan sideeda uu isku filnaansho weyn iyo isku tiirsanaasho weyn iyo isfahan weyn ee labada bulsho ka dhexeeya ayaa jira. aniga ka gudoomiye ahaan wallaahi oo aniga hadda milkeediida mustaqbalkeeda waxaan ugu riyoonayaa madii aad iyo aad iyo aad u wanaagsan oo hadda xawliga ay ku socoto waa xawli mustaqbalkeed markaa in aan ku riyoodo.
There are a lot of teachers who I won't forget that assisted us to reach this great victory. I want to learn management to solve the continuing problem in my country, and my wish is to be the first female president for Somalia. The president of Somalia, I will open more schools for the society. That's my wish and my dream. I will.
So I want to be the first female president of Somalia, and she might be. And that's really what motivates me the most, is to work with people like that with great ambitions and see that excitement and that belief in the future, and being actually able to help some of them on the way. That's what actually makes me take the long flights and spend 200 days traveling a year, because it's really what gives me the most is to be in the field and really understand what's going on and what are the root causes of people's challenges. What we did in south of Ethiopia in this program has really helped inform the new strategy for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, in what you have seen as the Global Compact for Refugees, that was decided upon in New York last year. And it's changed Ethiopia government's policy towards refugees from an encampment policy to an integration policy. And that's what we want. We want every refugees to have the chance to contribute to society, be a positive element and a positive contributor, and instead of somebody who's dependent on aid, because nobody wants to be dependent on aid. Nobody wants to be a refugee. Let's not forget that. You're forced to become a refugee because you couldn't stay in the country where you were. All they want is to have a job, feed their family, and avoid being bombed every day. So I wanted to close by saying a little bit about IKEA. And all the grants that I provide is funded by profits from IKEA, obviously. I'm very lucky to have a company to work with, because there's things that we can do through the foundation and the things that the company can do, which we couldn't do. And I'm very lucky that Ingvar, the founder, gave the company to a foundation. So, do you know what IKEA stands for? So it's really not important. When you have a big brand and you spend enough time marketing it, it doesn't matter what it means. But in this case, it means Ingvar Kamprad. Elmteryd is the name of his farm, and Agunnaryd is the name of the county where he grew up. Thought that was a nice factoid for you to see. IKEA, by the way, which I wanted to share with you, have very ambitious strategy when it comes to sustainability and what they call the people and planet positive strategy. And they make very aggressive targets for themselves for how to contribute in the societies where they operate, in the 50 countries where they have supply chain, which are not owned by them, but operated by individual companies. But also what they do to help those 1,500 suppliers become more sustainable. So just picked out a couple of the targets that they have set for themselves. They will become energy neutral next year. They will remove all single-use plastic products by next year. They will become climate positive by 2030. That means that they will reduce more carbon in their operations worldwide than they emit themselves. So they will have to do something beyond what they emit themselves in their global supply chain, which is no small feat. They will achieve zero emissions for home deliveries. And the most important and most interesting thing, I think, is the last point, which says that we will design all IKEA products with new circular principles using only renewable and recycled materials. That's pretty bold. And I only say this because you should know that whenever you go to IKEA and buy a product, some of your money will go towards what I do. It also will go towards driving very, very ambitious strategies towards saving the climate. So I have one last little anecdote. Do I have time for that? Because I told you that we work very closely with the company, and there's certain things the company can do that we can't do. So take Jordan. Jordan is a poor country in the Middle East with an 8 million people population. Jordan currently has 1.2 million Syrian refugees. Make that math and think about what it would do to Australia. How many millions would that be relating to the 22 million in Australia? So with a country like Jordan, it's really a numbers issue. It's not a numbers issue in Europe. We have 1.5 million refugees in Europe. It's not a problem. It's a political problem. It's not a cost problem or a technical problem. It's a political problem. And we can talk about that if we had more time. In this case, it's about a country that's really poor, and what we could do to help that country is really to expand the economy. Because there's no point in having the refugees compete for the same jobs as the Jordanians in a poor country that's already struggling. So what I did was to tell IKEA, okay, can you consider at least building a supply chain in Jordan, creating jobs, manufacturing products that will go to export, because that means expanding the economy. So what you see here is an example of that. We got IKEA there, they looked at the country, they looked at the foreign direct investment opportunities, and they settled on an opportunity to provide jobs for women, refugee women, and Jordanian women to come together and manufacture products, crafts products that are being manufactured and sold in IKEA stores worldwide. That means jobs for not only refugee women, but jobs for women locally, and it means beautiful products that are sold in IKEA stores. If this is successful, which it is so far in the stores, we can sell millions of this, of course, because IKEA is a big operation. But this is just an example of how the company can do things that I can't do, and how by working together with a like company, we have more opportunities as a foundation that many others have because of that simple fact. So, I should have done this differently. Anything, I think that's really humanitarian leadership in practice, that you actually see the private sector go in and do something that is not going to be profitable short term, but it's going to be profitable over time, fortunately, and it has a significant social impact. I do a last anecdote now, because I wanted to go back to the great founder of IKEA. I talked a lot about Ingvar, but he was a very unique person, and he really set the scene for the success of this business. And Ingvar would often open the meetings by asking one question. He would say, so tell me about your failures. Tell me about what went wrong. Because there's no better way to learn than to make mistakes, make failures, and learn from them and drive development. So it's back to his thinking about everything is about iterative development. It's about doing it a little bit better, thinking one more step ahead to make it cheaper, better quality, less environmentally impactful, and so on and so forth. That was his whole thinking. And it's an ongoing learning process. And I want to end with a quote by Ingvar, which is one of his favorite quotes, which says basically, most things remain undone. What a glorious future. Thank you.